Alright, Joe here, welcome back to We Need to Talk. This is of course the show that looks at football on the internet over the past 7 days. The 7 days that seen Jurgen Klopp interrupted by a rather interesting phone call.
Not mine. I like it, Princess Leslie Lou.
Lucas Torreira give his shirt to DT's son.
And that will mean the world to those Arsenal fans who certainly for large parts of that game, the first half, that's a nice touch, wasn't it?
And this man get rehired by a Premier League club.
You don't know the answer to that question, and I think you are an ostrich.
Anyway, this week we need to talk about Lyon. You might well remember me a few weeks ago sat in this very seat talking about the turmoil at Napoli between the fans, the players, the management, the owners. Well, no, not the only ones. Step forward Lyon, who are having their own off-the-field issues. This time, though, it's mainly between the ultras and the players. Ultra fans in France have made some major headlines over the last few years, haven't they? Let's not forget the Patrice Evra fighting the ultras. Let's not forget about the CEO being threatened by Bordeaux fans. Let's not, of course, forget the PSG fights and the general homophobia that's taken over the ultra scene in France. The latest ultra spat is all about Lyon though, and this one is seriously ugly. You might well have seen this week some of the images involving Memphis Depay having a physical fight with fans on the pitch after their Champions League game against Leipzig. Well, today I'm going to attempt to explain why that's happened, what's happened over the past year, and who exactly it's happened to. Firstly, I think you need to understand a little bit of the backdrop about Lyon. So I reached out on Twitter, I asked some fans what's been going on there, and they were talking to me about Rudy Garcia, how he doesn't really have the support of the fan base. He is, of course, joining them as a previous Olympique Marseille manager. Lyon hates Marseille, so that was a black mark against his name, and the general run of form, performances and results haven't been good enough. So fans are already fairly annoyed. They're not happy with the club, not happy with Rudy Garcia, and some of the players have irritated them as well. The main player this entire issue centres around is Marcelo. Not the Real Madrid left-back. I'm talking about the 32-year-old Lyon centre-back who they signed for about €8.5 million from Besiktas. He was also linked, by the way, with West Ham back in the summer when he was 31. Pellegrini was quite interested in taking him, but he decided not to move and instead wanted to stay and fight for his place at Lyon. Which is fairly odd, given that some of these problems between Marcelo and the Ultras started as far back as April 2019, when he had his first clash with supporters. Have a watch of this. There you can see Marcelo telling the fans that he is playing for them, and the fans arguing back saying you're not giving enough for the shirt, and clearly friction is beginning to happen. Since then, tensions between the Brazilian and the fans have been bubbling somewhat. The player's been underperforming, I think the fans would argue, and the fans have been taking it a little bit too far with their reactions towards him. It all kind of kicked off when they lost 2-1 to Benfica. The fans confronted the entire team at the airport, and it was Marcelo who stepped forward. He started having a verbal confrontation with the fans. The fans bit back, and there was some reports that it actually ended up in a fight between the fans and Marcelo. Obviously, that confrontation made an already bad situation 10 times worse because the abuse got horrific during the match against Toulouse. They were taking out on his family, they were taking out on his kids, they were throwing missiles at him during the warm-up. Not nice scenes. In fact, it was such ugly scenes that Rudy Garcia decided he couldn't even play him in the week's following match against Benfica at home for fear that he might get assaulted on the pitch or something even worse could happen. His wife even took to Instagram, putting out a post saying that there was a campaign being held against her husband led by one idiot who wants to show himself. His problem with my husband is personal, she says here. Since Garcia didn't play him against Benfica, the abuse has gotten even worse. Every time he steps onto the field, Lyon fans absolutely hammer him. And this week was kind of the biggest moment in this whole saga when one fan in particular invaded the pitch after the team's fairly credible 2-2 draw with Leipzig and held up a banner calling him a donkey and telling him to get out of the club. Obviously, this didn't go down well with a lot of the players, in particular Memphis Depay, who was the guy who scored the equaliser to send them through to the round of 16. In fact, it went down so badly with Memphis, he sprinted half the length of the pitch to confront that fan holding the banner, ripped it out of his hands and started having what can only be described as a fight with it. Now, Memphis is Lyon's best player, he's their captain, and I think this really shows how bad things have got between the fans and the players. As you can see in this bit of footage, Jason Denoyer is actually having to physically manhandle Memphis away from the supporters as a group. And it didn't get any better. After the game, Memphis was absolutely furious. He spoke to RMC, or a major media outlet in France, almost in tears really, when he was giving this interview. We don't have the copyright, so I'll have to read it out. He said, "Look in my eyes, I'm upset, I'm angry. You go to the supporters and thank them, and they say crazy, crazy things about somebody's family, somebody's kids." He also made the allegation that fans were spitting on him when he went over there. Just horrifically ugly. He's also urged people higher up the group, like Jean-Michel Aulas, to take further action against that fan and the fan group as a whole that were involved in the demonstrations. Rudy Garcia has come out publicly to back Memphis. It now seems like it's really the ultras against the players and the management, which is a recipe for disaster and can only end one way. And that way seems to be that Marcelo is going to leave the club, which is really, really sad. Apparently he told teammates that he cannot face it anymore and fears for not only his, but his family's safety on the pitch and off the pitch too. So Lyon look like they will let him go in January, despite the fact he's under contract until 2021. They too think it's becoming a bit too much of a dangerous situation. As for what happens to the ultra group, I'm not too sure. It's a pretty appalling situation that fans have been able to force a player out just because he's not performing particularly well, with violence and with threats. Never nice to see. Lyon need to deal with this really, really swiftly, because they've got some star players like Memphis Depay, and as you can see in this whole episode, he's not happy, the fans aren't happy, the board need to come down really, really hard on the people involved. It's a total shambles really at Lyon right now. Moving on to the good, the bad and the ugly. The good this week is all about the Rainbow Laces campaign, which is tackling homophobia in football. And Graham Souness in the Sky Sports studio told us all about his journey into educating himself on the issue.
Came from a generation, from a time in our football where it was, I'll say it, extremely homophobic. You know, the banter in the dressing room. Yeah. But 12 months ago, 9 months ago, I came down and took part in the parade here. And it was enlightening.
Moving on to the bad is about Bournemouth winger Jordan Ibe, who will face trial for allegedly driving away after crashing his Bentley into a coffee shop earlier in the summer. Hit and run on a coffee shop. Premier League footballers. Moving on to the ugly, and this one's all about Cruzeiro. They were, of course, relegated from the Brazilian top flight for the first time in 98 years this week, and it saw some pretty horrific fan violence, including 3 homemade bombs. Yes, bombs being brought into the stadium, being detonated and injuring 13 people. What is going on? So that's it for this week's episode of We Need to Talk. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want more serious football chat from Doogie and the boys, make sure you head over to Eurofootball Daily in time for Continental Club. It goes up in about 1 hour. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.